Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another First Friday event. We are so happy to have you join us this evening. Hopefully, you are all feeling well and secure and taking care of each other as well as your other members of your family. These events are once again sponsored by the Town of Woodside Arts and Culture Committee. It's a group of volunteers here in the Town of Woodside who try to create interesting programs to be enjoyed by all the members of our community. And this evening, we're fortunate, one of our committee members has brought Lawrence Frank to us this evening. And Lawrence is a fascinating individual. Dr. Lawrence Frank is, well, he's a research associate at the University of California, Berkeley since 1984. And he's part of the Berkeley Hyena and Lion Project and currently in the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology. He has worked with predators in Kenya for over 40 years, and that's saying something. You know, when this program was first suggested to us about lions, the first thought that I have about lions is actually a quote from Alexander the Great. It says, "I am not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep. I am afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion." So considering the world that we live in, perhaps not that far off from reality. But this evening, we are very fortunate again to have Lawrence Frank with us. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about these animals that roar. You know, lion has been described as passion. The lion is fire, and lions call you to them. And this evening, we will find out why lions have been called to Lawrence Frank. So with that, thank you very much for joining us and welcome Lawrence Frank. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I hope you can hear and see me.
We are hearing you.
How about that?
There we go.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom, for your kind introduction, and special thanks to Hank Upton for inviting me to do this. And extra special thanks for the committee for all their hand-holding with this technology. I have given a lot of talks, but never a Zoom talk before, so I very much hope this will work. And with that, let's see if I can make this happen.
And for those of you with questions, just to remind you that please put them in the chat. And at the end of Lawrence's presentation, we'll be going over questions. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you can see this lovely lion that is on my first slide. I have been working with lions for the last 25 years. Before that, my early career in Kenya, I worked on predatory birds, and after that, for many years on spotted hyenas. And, oops, there we go. I'm going to start out by taking the long view. As an evolutionary biologist, we tend to think long term. Everybody knows that for hundreds of millions of years, the Earth was dominated by dinosaurs and their ancestors and relatives, immense beasts. Fewer people are aware that after the dinosaurs were driven to extinction by that famous asteroid, mammals took over the Earth and grew to immense size. In geological or ecological time, this scene was just yesterday. This was California 12,000 years ago. And then humans arrived. Efficient hunters came from Asia, probably with dogs to help them hunting. And in an extraordinarily short amount of time, in literally a few thousand years, all the big animals in North America were driven to extinction. North America, and before that Eurasia, had a large mammal fauna very comparable to what still exists in Africa, but humans wiped it out. Now even Africa is losing its wildlife at a horrific rate. In my mind, we are in the end times. Our generations are seeing the end of hundreds of millions of years of the earth being dominated by very big beasts. And unless we really get on top of things very quickly, even the ones in Africa will be soon gone. Okay, I have to make a confession here. I spent 20 years studying spotted hyenas, which are the coolest, most complicated, most interesting animal you can imagine. I'm a hyena guy. Very few people like hyenas except hyena biologists. And we hyena biologists, therefore, have a bit of a chip on our shoulder about lions, which everybody loves. And I'm not ashamed to say that for a long time, I have referred to lions as the dumb blondes of the hyena, of the savannah. They just, okay, I will stop carrying on about how cool hyenas are, because about 25 years ago, when I turned from basic research on hyenas to conservation in Kenya, I quickly found that nobody was going to pay money to conserve hyenas. However, lions were another issue. Another thing people are rarely aware of is that 10,000 years ago, the lion was the most widespread mammal on Earth. Not only was it in Africa, but it was across most of Eurasia. It was in northern North America, in North and Central America, and even over half of South America. Again, Pleistocene extinctions, probably humans were largely responsible for the disappearance of lions from everywhere except Africa. Today, lions are restricted to a handful of countries in Africa. The gray areas show the countries in which lions occur. The black areas are the actual areas that they occur, but even those black areas are a bit of a fiction. The lions of West Africa are essentially gone. It's a unique subspecies, very, very few left. And if those survive the next few years, it will be miraculous. Many of the other black dots on the map are parks which may have lions. Many of them are parks in name only. They're lines on a map with no protection and severe impacts from humans. So lions have been reduced to about 5% of their historic range in Africa and are in really big trouble. Unfortunately, people were not aware of what kind of trouble they were in until about 2003. A few of us who had a long experience in Africa were very aware that in areas which you could hear lions roaring every night, non-protected areas, parks, rangeland, cattle country, you could hear lions and find their tracks and occasionally see them in a huge, huge area. But by about 2000, most of those lions in unprotected areas had disappeared. And I gave a talk in London in 2003, which was attended by some journalists, and I pointed out, this was not my work, but I pointed out that other biologists had estimated that lions were down to about 20,000. This was news to most of the world. This was a talk in London. The next day, almost every newspaper in the British Commonwealth carried headlines, "Lions close to extinction." Today, I estimate, based on lion range and where they used to be, that there were at least 1 million lions in Africa in 1850, before European colonization really had a large impact. Today, the best estimates are that there are roughly 20,000 lions in the wild. Roughly 50% of those are in Tanzania for a number of very interesting reasons. The British colonialists did excellent planning. long before independence. They created a large number of large parks. Everybody's heard of Serengeti. Fewer people have heard of Ruaha and the Selous. These are immense areas, more or less protected. And when these parks were created for tourism, they also created very large buffers around these parks in which people were not allowed to live, but were set aside for trophy hunting. So Tanzania still today has a huge amount of wilderness, much of it in park, much of it in hunting concessions, still with abundant wildlife. However, as in everywhere else in Africa, the Tanzania human population is exploding. There's roughly 1 billion people in Africa today. When I started working in Kenya, there was a fifth of that number. The demographers estimate that at the current rate of increase, there will be 4 to 6 billion people in Africa. That doesn't leave much room for wildlife. I have spent my career working in Kenya in a number of different areas. Kenya, in contrast to Tanzania, as you can see, has only one large park, Tsavo National Park. The rest of them are all very small. Again, some of these are basically fictional lines on a map up in northern Kenya here. It has, of course, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. It has, of course, extensive tourism, but no trophy hunting. Bushmeat poaching used to be a very small problem in Kenya, although it's widespread in the rest of Africa. But in recent years, bushmeat poaching has increased tremendously with a terrible impact on wildlife. And again, the human population is exploding. There were perhaps 10 million people in Kenya when I started working there in 1970. It's about 50 million now. 1977 was an important year for conservation in Kenya. Number one, the Canadian government started a program of aerial counting of both wildlife and livestock. And those provided accurate data on wildlife numbers, which are actually very hard to come by for most of Africa. And those counts continue today. So we have a pretty good idea of wildlife numbers and how those have changed since 1977. In that same year, trophy hunting was banned in response to the epidemic of elephant and rhino poaching. Some of the older people might remember from the 1970s. It was just a mass slaughter of animals for their tusks and their horns. One of the consequences, however, of the end of trophy hunting was that wildlife outside protected areas, parks where tourists go, suddenly lost all value. To the local people, wildlife became merely a nuisance. Elephants and buffalo trampled your crops. They occasionally killed you and your children. Predators, of course, eat large animals with hooves, and the most abundant of those in Africa now are cattle, goats, and sheep. Because wildlife outside protected areas had lost all value, the government lost interest in protecting them. So since 1977, there has been very little effective anti-poaching efforts outside of protected areas. And again, one of the consequences of that is that this bushmeat trade, which used to be very small in Kenya, has exploded. On top of that, as I say, a 5-fold increase in human population, meaning lots of habitat has been lost to agriculture. The vast grasslands and semi-arid lands of the north have been horrifically overgrazed, just far too many cattle, which have reduced certainly the whole northern half of Kenya from productive semi-arid grassland with lots of wildlife and plenty of cattle has now turned into rock desert, which supports very little life. On top of that, there's been an epidemic of poisoning since about 2000, of poisoning of carnivores and any other animals that might eat a cow. the upshot of that is, for these various reasons, there's been roughly an 80% decline in wildlife in Kenya since 1977. And again, there's good aerial count data to show that. Again, most people are unaware of the impact of bushmeat poaching. Of course, many people in Africa from the beginning of time have lived on wildlife. Now we call that poaching. And that's tenable when there's not too many people and vast amount of wildlife. However, given the increase in the human population and the lack of law enforcement, untold millions of animals have strangled slowly and badly in snares across Africa. People are setting snares for antelope, such as this, good to eat. Everything else gets caught in snares. I don't know if you can see the wire coming off of this baboon's neck, but I had to dart this guy to remove a snare. Nobody's trying to catch baboons to eat, but everything gets caught, including large carnivores. Untold numbers of lions, hyenas, leopards end up in snares that are not set for them and end up dying very badly. And of course, the other impact of the loss of wildlife to bushmeat snaring is that the carnivores' food supply has dwindled drastically. Lots less wildlife, lots more livestock. What do the lions and hyenas do? They eat livestock. And here we have the essence of the problem. This poor old lion killed those calves. The next morning, he and the calves ended up in the back of a pickup with a bullet hole through him. This summarizes what has happened to carnivores, not only in Africa, but everywhere in the world. Large carnivores are the last mammals to the first mammals to go when human numbers and particularly livestock increased. 200 years ago, there were more grizzly bears in the Bay Area than anywhere else in the world. Anybody seen a grizzly bear recently? That's not so much that they're a threat to humans, but they ate people's cows and they are gone. Of course, people in Africa have killed lions for millennia, more than millennia. But until very recently, there were far fewer people and far more lions. Lions breed prolifically. They can take quite a heavy rate of mortality, of killing, and yet maintain their populations. But once the killing gets out of control, inevitably numbers diminish. As I said, I spent a long time in Kenya studying spotted hyenas. In 1997, I had an opportunity to start doing predator conservation, and that developed into projects in 3 different areas. My original and still current study areas here in Laikipia district, which is all unprotected rangeland, no national parks. It's grazing land for cattle and for wildlife. I eventually started another project down here in Maasai land. Many of you are familiar with Ambisella National Park and the Mara National Reserve, where I also had a small project for a while. So I'm going to be talking particularly about these 2 different areas where I've been working for quite a number of years now. In 1997, I was asked to come to Laikipia, where I had never really been. I didn't know anything about it, to look at predator conservation. Laikipia is a fascinating area. It comprises about 6,500 square kilometers of areas which still have wildlife. The rest of it is small-scale farming. It is semi-arid rangeland. Most of it isn't good for farming, and all of this rangeland is either privately owned by ranches, which are cattle ranches, which are increasingly converting to conservancies, but still have cattle, and communally owned land where people live in the traditional manner, herding their livestock on the land where they've been doing that for probably 10,000 years. No, I'm sorry, that's wrong, about 4,000 years. The ranches are an incredible conservation success. There's a very strong conservation ethic among the owners, and they also have increasingly come to rely on small scale but upscale tourism. Nobody makes money on livestock, but tourism pays enough of the bills that these ranches have managed to stay in business. And some of them now are owned by wealthy foreigners. These ranches, conservancies have healthy rangeland, good long grass, because they graze their cattle very lightly, a low stocking density of cattle, carefully preserving the grassland. And they also support abundant wildlife, as well as a robust lion population, which we find to be 6 to 7 lions per 100 square kilometers. That doesn't mean much to anybody, but that's a really healthy lion population, often greater than is found in a lot of national parks. Again, excellent livestock management, meaning relatively low density of cattle. The ranches use the traditional cattle husbandry methods, which probably arose very soon after humans first domesticated livestock. Methods which protect their stock from both predators and humans who want to steal it. And if any of you if you're familiar with pastoralists, lifestyle pastoralists, or herding people who live off their livestock, stealing cows and sheep from each other, from the neighbors, is a large part of the life of young men in many pastoralist societies, and especially in Africa. Because of their interest in preserving wildlife and because of tourism, the ranches tolerate considerable loss to predators. They lose some cattle, they do their best to prevent that, but when they lose them, they shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's part of doing business. And as a result, Laikipia District is an ideal laboratory for understanding how people can better protect livestock from predators, reducing the need or the urge to kill them. And also a terrific opportunity to learn how predators cope with pressure from humans. Pressure basically meaning killing them in retaliation for livestock husbandry. Laikipia has a greater diversity of large mammals and birds, for that matter, than anywhere else in Kenya. It's a transition zone between the arid north and the moister savannas of the south. So there's a great animal diversity, including a number of endangered species, one of which of particular interest is the Grubby Zebra, which used to be found throughout much of northeastern Africa and is now limited not entirely to Laikipia, but Laikipia is the last stronghold of this magnificent zebra. It hosts all of the large predators. Any of you familiar with American ranching practices will understand how extraordinary this is. People raising cattle in the presence of big, hungry animals which want to eat their cows. And as I said, there's a lot of livestock on the ranches. It's mostly cattle. On the communal areas, it is fewer and fewer cattle because the land will no longer support cattle. Lots of sheep and goats, camels, and donkeys. A word about traditional African livestock management. If you think about it, when people first domesticated livestock, say 12,000 years ago in Western Asia, there were an awful lot of big predators, very few people, and very small numbers of these early domesticated livestock. So they must have early on developed methods for protecting their livestock from these superabundant predators. And that in Africa today, and I'm convinced that this was the case very early in livestock domestication in Asia, people keep their livestock in bomas in southern Africa called kraals, in America called corrals. This is a traditional Maasai village. As you can see, it is surrounded by a thorn bush fence. Inside that fence, every man has a house or several houses, depending on how many wives he has, and every livestock owner within the bigger enclosure has a smaller enclosure, again of dense thorn bush, in which the livestock spend the night. During the day, they're herded out to graze. The herds stay tightly together. They're accompanied by men and boys and dogs to protect them from livestock, from predators. But given the realities of pastoralist existence, to protect them from other people who want to steal them as much as to protect them from predators. And so when the European settlers started ranching cattle in this area, of course, they adopted the local traditional methods. So on the ranches, as well as in the communal areas, the cattle are herded by day and brought back into hopefully stout bomas at night, from which they can't escape to get eaten by predators. To give you an idea of the attitude toward wildlife in Laikipia, and this continues to amaze me after 25 years there. Think of the American West. Every rancher has a rifle rack in the back of his pickup, and not all, but most will shoot anything with 4 legs that could conceivably eat a cow or a sheep. This is fairly old data from the early 2000s. Things haven't changed much. The Yellowstone ecosystem, as we all know, had wolves reintroduced to it in the late 1990s, to the great dismay of ranchers. But any cow that is eaten, the owner is eaten by a wolf or a grizzly bear, the owner gets full compensation for the value of that animal. In the entire 27,000 square mile Yellowstone region, in whatever year this was, 2003, 13 cattle and 71 sheep were eaten in a typical year. The owners were paid full value. When I started working here in Laikipia in 1997, the average ranch was losing over 10 cattle and over 50 sheep to predators. They received no compensation and yet tolerated the predators. I find this just extraordinary. Nowhere else in the world are ranchers dumb enough to maintain large carnivores among their herds of cattle. The communal areas, again, the parts of Laikipia, which are very similar to Maasai land, southern Kenya, northern Tanzania, and much of the rest of Africa, are inhabited by pastoralist people, keeping their livestock. Over the years, these areas have become grossly overpopulated by people, meaning horrific overgrazing. Again, most of this land, essentially all of northern Kenya, has been reduced from semi-arid but productive rangeland to stone desert, which supports little of anything. So in these community areas, there's very little wildlife, few of any lions. The lions sometimes will move off the commercial ranches where the conservancies where they're relatively safe. They move into these communal areas right next door. There's no wildlife to eat. They eat cattle, and then bad things happen. Until recently, hyenas have persisted in these areas, but they have been very, very badly affected by poisoning. So this is a typical landscape in a communal area of Kenya, bare ground with scattered trees. Again, typical of all of northern Kenya. When I started doing actual lion research in 1998, we quickly found, well, for one thing, these animals are persecuted. Even on the ranches, they were being shot frequently enough that lions didn't show themselves. All of you who have been to national parks in Africa know that there's a pride of lions under every bush. Not only are they super abundant, but they don't even wake up when they're surrounded by 50 minibuses full of excited tourists. It's very, very different in non-protected areas where predators are persecuted or killed in retaliation for killing livestock. You hardly ever see a lion. It's dense bush. There's no way to learn anything about them except by radio collaring. If you're studying lions in a national park, you go out, pop a dart into the lion, which you can drive right up to, and there you go. In Laikipia, we quickly learned we could never do this. We had to develop a fairly complex, very humane and effective method for catching lions. I won't go into it here, but our first major challenge was just getting our hands on lions to put collars on them so we could begin to learn about them. My first colleague in Laikipia, when I started working there in 1998, was Rosie Woodruff from the UK. She is a very prominent carnivore biologist specializing in badgers in UK. She had an interest in wild dogs. She joined me in Kenya, and we started doing two things at once, trying to learn about lions and particularly how they coped with human pressures, and also, of course, trying to figure out how to better protect livestock so that people did not feel the need to kill predators in retaliation for livestock depredations. A lot of papers came out of this work. As I said, Rosie had a particular interest in wild dogs, and we were incredibly fortunate that although wild dogs had been extinct in the area since about the early 1980s, wild dogs are subject to disease and go extinct locally very quickly. Suddenly, wild dogs showed up, a hefty population developed in a very few years. They breed like rabbits. And Rosie had a terrific wild dog conservation and research project underway. Early on, I took on a Kenyan graduate student, Mordecai Ogada, who also participated in a lot of this work on how to improve livestock husbandry to better protect livestock from predators so that people didn't feel the need to shoot and poison them. Mordecai has gone on to become a prominent conservationist in Kenya. So very briefly, the sort of things we were looking at were incredibly simple. It turns out that one of the best things a pastoralist or a commercial rancher can do is to have dogs with his herds of cattle out by day. Dogs don't chase predators away, but they yap and howl when they detect a lion, and then people can step in and chase the lions away. That's actually surprisingly easy. One of the things we found early on was that the weak point in these bomas, in these traditional thorn bush corrals, was these gates, these openings in the thorn bush, where of course the livestock had to enter and leave by. Dogs turned out to be extremely effective at protecting livestock at night, again, sounding a warning when a lion appears or hyenas appear. Major reduction in livestock losses per dog present at a boma. The fewer of these gates are the weak point in a boma. That's just a tattered bush pulled into this opening to block it. A lion shows up, the cattle smell it, they panic, and they stampede out through these gates. The fewer gates in a boma, the more effective, and the more people there, the more human presence, the less likely lions were to come around. So we started doing a lot of work to help local people, particularly this communal pastoralists, in decreasing their losses to predators. And here I have to introduce my long-term colleague and dear friend, Stephen Ekwanga, who is a most marvelous guy. Stephen had little education. He only completed his high school degree a few years ago when our research had stopped for a while. And Stephen has been central to everything that I and my colleagues have done in everywhere we have worked in Kenya. He's a master lion trapper. He understands lion behavior extraordinarily well. But most importantly, Stephen began to develop a program to educate the local people in very simple and very low-cost modifications to their bomas to better protect livestock. One of his first developments was just hammering, splitting open an oil drum and creating a solid gate in place of the tatty little bush that used to block this opening, this gate in the boma. Nothing can get through this at night. that and a few other very cheap minor modifications to these traditional bomas, and we were able to reduce hyena depredation on livestock in these communities to just about nothing. With some young Kenyan filmmakers, we developed a terrific video in the local languages all about the cultural importance of lions, the tourist importance of lion, but mostly focused on, again, how to modify your livestock management methods to protect them from predators. Again, here's that gate. Here is a high-tech modern metal gate, costs a few bucks, no more hyena losses. Another major development in Laikipia was the development of these metal bomas on the conservancies. These were invented by my friend Giles Prettyjohn, a cattleman, and these are just panels of basically cyclone fencing held together by water pipes. These are lion-proof, meaning they're stampeding cattle-proof. A lion can come right up to this. The cattle panic, but they can't get out to run into the night to be killed by lions and hyenas and everything else out there. These mobile bomas, these can be moved across the landscape, and there's a lot of advantages to that. Reduced nighttime cattle losses on the conservancies, the ranches, to just about zero. Incredibly effective. Unfortunately, these cost a few $1,000s. It requires a pickup or a tractor to move these panels when you move the boma, which happens frequently. These are too expensive to be really available to the traditional people. But they made an immense difference to livestock losses on the conservancies. I was later joined by Elaine Cotterill from Oxford, who had previous lion experience, and she did her PhD on lion behavior in human-dominated landscapes. How do lions cope with human pressures, with the fear of humans? And this was dependent on the development of high-tech GPS collars, where we could follow the lions hour by hour across the landscape. Tremendous knowledge came out of this study. Basically, to distill it down, lions learn to avoid people by day. They hide out in the bush and roam around by night when there's no people to threaten them. And Elaine developed the notion of a landscape of coexistence, how animals and humans, how lions and humans can learn to live together by adapting their behavior in relatively small ways to avoid each other. In 2004, I was asked to start a new project in Maasai land, which we called the Kilimanjaro Lion Conservation Project. This was in the area around Ambisella National Park. Many of you who are familiar with the Maasai, the prototypical pastoralist, colorful people who live off their livestock and adore their livestock. And until very recently, Maasai land was also home to enormous numbers of lions. There's lots and lots of wildlife in these grassland, and hence lots of predators. But so these grasslands of Maasai land are nearly 40,000 square miles, the most important single wildlife area in Africa. But in the early 2000s, conservationists began to see a tremendous upsurge in lion killing by Maasai, and of course, a plummeting lion population. Of course, cattle people have always killed lions when they had to, but they had largely lost their former tolerance of lions. And so there was a tremendous increase in spearing, and particularly an increase in poisoning. And I put this tiny little picture in here. It's a pretty disgusting picture of rotting lions to remind me to talk about poisoning. You love your cattle. You get really pissed off when a lion kills it. In prior times, there wasn't a whole lot to do about it. These days, you can spend literally $1 or $2 on very cheap agricultural pesticides. You sprinkle that on your dead cow. Of course, lions come back to finish it at night. and the whole pride is dead by morning, including half a dozen hyenas and maybe 20 or 30 vultures, which have also fed on the carcass. Those of you who've been in Africa 30 years ago will remember, you look up in the sky and there's vultures everywhere. Little black dots soaring high. The poisoning has just about eliminated the vulture population in much of Africa. It has been a horrific catastrophe. I won't go into the causes of this. But anyway, this is the Ambisella ecosystem. Here's Amboseli National Park. Again, these are pastoralist, communally owned areas. Here is Tsavo National Park, and here is Kilimanjaro. This project was started by my colleague Seamus McLennan, who also got his master's from Oxford, doing very basic lion demography, which was extremely difficult. There were very few lions left by now. They were all terrified. You never laid eyes on them, totally nocturnal. And it was a huge project just to begin to get some collars on a few of these animals so that we could begin to see them and begin to count them. There were other conservationist colleagues had started a system of compensating people when they're paying local people when their cattle were taken, and Seamus did a terrific analysis of that. About that same time, I was contacted by Leila Hazza, who had experience doing community conservation in Tanzania and very badly wanted to work on lions with us. But I told Leila, we know enough about lion biology. What we really need to do is understand why the Maasai have lost their previous relative tolerance of lions and have been essentially wiping them out in very short order. Leila turned herself into a traditional anthropologist, went to live with a remote Maasai community, focusing on the attitudes and behavior of the young men, the warriors, who are the traditional lion killers. She learned a great deal about why attitudes had changed, what was happening socially, sociologically. I won't go into that. But out of her work, she came up with this crazy idea to turn these inveterate lion killers into lion conservationists, into lion guardians. I didn't think for a minute this would work because we expected them to monitor lions, or the idea was that they would begin to monitor lions, to work with the biologists, as well as helping their communities avoid lion depredation. I thought, you know, these guys are going to know where the lions are. They're going to kill them instantly. It didn't work out that way. It was a spectacular success. At about the same time, Stephanie Dolrenry joined us. She originally wanted to study hyenas in these communal areas, but they had been poisoned so severely that the hyena study basically couldn't work. So she turned again, similar to Elaine's work in Laikipia, to looking at lion behavior in these human-dominated landscapes and working very closely with Leila and Seamus to develop this Lion Guardian program. The Guardians had two major duties. These guys were very traditional warriors, largely uneducated, unemployable in the modern world, and basically no way to make a modern living. We hired them with two basic duties: to help monitor lions in their communities, and it's just extraordinary how much biology we were able to do, that these guys were able to do, that a single Western biologist driving around in a Land Rover could never do. Equally important, their duties were to assist their communities, to warn herders when lions were around so that they could herd their cattle in another direction, find livestock lost in the bush, which was always, you know, which are going to get nailed by lions or hyenas, help improve bomas, help improve all sorts of different aspects of livestock husbandry, and particularly to discourage other warriors from killing lions. I'm trying to squeeze in a lot into this short talk. So now I'm going to turn to current research in Laikipia, which has just been fantastically rewarding and productive. You will recall the Grubby Zebra occurs almost nowhere in Africa anymore except Laikipia. So of course the Grubby Zebra conservationists are extremely concerned about lions' impact on grevies. So with my good friends and also extremely well-known international conservationists, Margaret Kinnaird and her husband, Tim O'Brien, we got funds to buy fancy GPS collars, put them on lions, and this is really the most entertaining field work I've ever done in my life. The GPS collars take fixes through the night. They send them by satellite link to our computers in the morning, and we would be able to trot out there and go to places, to localities where lions had spent a few hours last night, presumably on a kill. Well, of course, a lot of these times there was no kill, they had just been resting. But over a couple of years, we documented about 800 different kills, and to our delight and surprise, found that lions were having much less of an impact on Grubby zebra than anybody thought, a greater impact on the common zebra, which is common, no big deal, but it turns out that lion predation on Grubbies is just not the issue that people had been concerned about. This also had a very practical local consequence in that we were able to send out maps every morning to the participating ranchers showing where the lions had moved the night before. And this was important because they could see where the lions were at 7 each morning and avoid herding cattle into that particular area. So if we know lions are in that valley, they herd their cattle in the opposite direction. Tomorrow morning, the lions will have moved and they can come back to that valley to graze. This had a tremendous impact on lion protection because, as I said, those mobile metal bomas had dramatically reduced nighttime predation, but the lions adapted by starting to kill cows during the day. By being able to tell ranchers where the lions were in the morning, that daytime depredation dropped drastically. There were other side effects which I hadn't anticipated. We'd suddenly see from the GPS data that a lion wasn't moving anymore. We'd go out to look, and on a number of different occasions found a lion in a snare. In this case, the collar had actually blocked the snare from strangling her. We darted the lion, freed her from the snare, and off she went. In another instance, we suddenly saw this lion moving in a rectangle. We didn't even know that a ranch had built a large fence to develop wheat farming in this particular area. And this guy who we knew quite well, this lion had become trapped in there. We saw him moving in a rectangle, figured out what was happening, darted him. He was in very bad shape, but he survived. You can see these were his movements a few days prior. He gets trapped. We move him out of the boma. The rancher provided a cow for his lunch. He put on some weight and off he went. So between these various developments, the mobile bomas, the GPS collaring of lions, and also just an increasing willingness of ranchers to spend money. These bomas are expensive to reduce lion depredation. In the course of 15 years, lion killing in response to cattle depredation in Laikipia dropped by 90%, a tremendous reduction, huge success. Recently, I've been joined by two, again, very prominent biologists from UC Santa Cruz, Chris Wilmers. A lot of you will have heard of his Santa Cruz Puma project. He's very prominent in Puma research in California, and his colleague Terry Williams, who does amazing work on ecological energetics. What does it cost to be a wild animal in terms of food needs in relation to movements, to hunting, and increasingly to impact to avoiding human pressures? Terry is amazing. She shuttles between the Arctic, the equator, Kenya, and the Antarctic. In the Arctic, she studies seals and whales and polar bears. In the Antarctic, also big seals, and in Kenya, lions. One of the upshots of and Terry and Chris had developed really high-tech GPS collars that include an accelerometer, which shows you exactly how fast the lion is moving. And when you know how fast they're moving and you're able to calibrate those movements with using zoo lions running in physiological chambers on a treadmill, believe it or not, you can then calibrate the wild lion's movements and have a very good idea of how much energy they are using in just all the daily matters of life. And in terms of conservation, this is incredibly important because it turns out that all these things lions do to avoid people, which I mentioned briefly earlier, are energetically expensive. To avoid people, you have to eat more. That means you might end up killing more livestock. That's likely to get you killed. Terry has done similar work on human impacts on elephant seals and other marine mammals. It turns out that just avoiding human disturbance is an energetically expensive thing for wild animals to do. These GPS collars took tens and tens of thousands of data points. Every hour or down to every 5 minutes through many, many nights, there are gigabytes or terabytes of data, which are gradually being analyzed by postdocs and grad students at Davis. Again, even more detailed information on how lions move through the landscape in relation to humans and livestock, trying to keep themselves alive by eating enough without getting themselves into severe problems with humans. This is Justin Sirachi, who is an amazing computational biologist who has started working on these data. Anna Nisi, a grad student of Chris, again, this is a paper she wrote comparing African lions' behavior in relation to humans, again, movements based on these GPS data, comparing African lions to mountain lions, where she's working right here, right in our area. I want to make one more shout out to Steve Ikwanga. He is undoubtedly the best, most experienced lion conservationist and predator biologist in Kenya, native Kenyan biologist. Stephen is currently doing a course in wildlife management in Kenya, which will greatly increase his employability once I finally shuffle off. He is so effective in working with people on their lion issues. I'm just forever amazed by Stephen. So reliable, so competent, so smart, so good at everything he does. This course he is on, and he hopes to do a higher course once this one is done, costs a lot of money. If anybody wants to contribute to African conservation, helping support Stephen in his studies is the best use of your money that I can think of. So briefly, lions and all African wildlife are disappearing rapidly. African wildlife is disappearing at a horrific rate. There's perhaps 1/10 of 1% of the wildlife in Africa that there was 200 years ago. Because things like lions and wild dogs and elephants move so widely, parks are not enough. We need to maintain wildlife populations between and among parks, because lots of conservation biology here, but small areas simply aren't big enough. A lion leaves the park, he eats a cow, and he's dead the next morning. So it is incredibly important to maintain wildlife populations among these, between the parks. Living with lions is not difficult. People have been doing it for 10 or 12,000 years. But the bottom line is that rural people must benefit financially from wildlife. It does no good to go out there and tell a Maasai whose cow has just been eaten, oh, we love lions. You have to love your lions too. He loves his cows. Lions are a very, very secondary concern for him. If it's simpler to spend $1 or $2 to poison them all, why not? We need to find better ways than tourism currently provides for local people to benefit financially from the wildlife. Oh. Again, ancient technologies, these bomas work very well. New technologies can be developed. To me, this metal gate is a new technology. When I started this work, I was convinced that a $300 old traditional radio collar was far too expensive and complex to use for lion conservation. These days, we're using $4,000 GPS collars to tremendous effect. As always, I've talked too long. I want to acknowledge all the many individuals and organizations which have supported this work over the years. Several of these are local people. Steve Gold lives in San Francisco. He's become a very good friend. The Vaninis live in Woodside. Arthur and Elena Court and Nancy Lusk and Michael Smith live in Southern California, have all been tremendously supportive in this work over the years, and it would not have happened without them.
Lawrence, thank you. That was absolutely incredible. I know everybody has a greater understanding of the dynamics of lions in Africa and the effect that the human population, whether it be a native population or tourism, has on their particular lifestyle for the lions. Now, you mentioned several times during the talk about lions and hyenas and other predators feeding on cattle. Well, if the cattle is protected, this is one of the questions that's come through. What if other wildlife is being moved away or can't find food? Where are the lions going to go to find their food?
Yeah, that's it. Again, exploding human populations taking up most of the habitat that was, for hundreds of millions of years was there for wildlife. These protected areas, national parks, are always going to be central to conservation, areas where wildlife is totally protected. But unless we can maintain wildlife populations between these parks where people and their cattle live, wildlife is essentially doomed. And I wish I had an easy answer of how to make wildlife pay for these very poor rural people who depend on their livestock. It's very tough. And again, I can only say we need to find better ways of paying people to live with wildlife so that they're incentivized, because just telling them to be nice to wild animals doesn't work.
Yeah, that seems to be a common theme all over the world, where people want to go and view wildlife, but the locals who live there, who have to interact with them, especially if they're predators, don't see it the same way. So this concept that we're talking about for Africa could certainly be true with other parts of the world. We have another question here. Did the puma evolve from the lion in Africa?
Oh, no. They are obviously related, but they are not in the same group of cats, the big cats, lions, leopards, jaguars, snow leopards. They're one group, the Panthera genus. Pumas are actually more closely related to other small cats in a different group of cats.
So your relationship with the locals, whether it be the Maasai or other groups, over the years, have you developed a good relationship with them so that they believe what you're saying about the lions and how they can protect themselves? Or are you having more difficulty encounters with other ranchers who don't understand the dynamics?
The ranchers have just been spectacular. As I said, there was a very strong conservation ethic in this area in the first place. But knowing about Western ranchers and about ranchers in Southern Africa who just will not tolerate predators, I was expecting a really hard time in Laikipia. And I found exactly the opposite. The great majority of these guys, and there's not many, there's maybe 30 of these ranches and ranch owners and managers. The great majority of them are totally on side. They want the lions as long as they don't lose too many cattle. When Rosie and I started working there, literally 20% of the adult lion population in Laikipia was being shot every year after killing cattle. Because lions are incredibly reproductive, the population was stable. But again, the great majority of ranchers were totally on side. They began to spend more and more money to protect their cattle so that they could have the lions. Some of this is enlightened self-interest. They want to maintain their tourism. But, these guys, their families have been there for over 100 years. They have hung on in spite of all sorts of hardship. They love the country. They love the local people. They love the wildlife, and they're committed to preserving that. So they are just remarkable. I have a great many friends among pastoralists. My colleagues have done most of the actual on-the-ground work with people. Again, that project in the Ambisella area, the Lion Guardians, has been fabulously successful. Where the Lion Guardians are in operation, working with their community and working with our biologists, lion killing has dramatically reduced. In a neighboring area where there's no lion guardians, the lions are essentially gone. And the Lion Guardian project is now being replicated in other parts of Africa, and it has just been a tremendous success. So yes, I think people do appreciate what we've been doing, as long as their cattle aren't being eaten.
Understood. So another question here, since there's a low survival rate of lion cubs, what is the main cause for this?
Low survival of cubs?
Yes.
An early lion biologist did a calculation. There is so much cub mortality due to starvation, due to being killed by hyenas, due to being killed by other lions. As most of you know, when new males take over a pride, the first thing they do is kill all the cubs so that they can mate with the female and raise their own young. This is simple behavioral ecology. There's just a lot of cub mortality. And so Steve Bertram, 40 years ago, lions mate a lot. If any of you have seen lions mating in Africa, they mate every 20 minutes or so for days on end. And Bertram calculated that it takes about 5,000 matings to produce one adult lion. Life, I think a lot of people don't realize how very tough life is for wild animals. Most young don't survive. Those that do grow to adulthood face, if you're prey, you're constantly looking over your shoulder for predators. I think wild animals live in a constant state of PTSD because life is just simply that dangerous. If you're a big predator or an elephant, you have to worry about the top predator, humans. And if you're a male, you're constantly fighting other males. I don't know how many male lions I have dealt with, which were dying or dead from horrible injuries from fights with other males. Females, new males come in and take over a pride. They kill the cubs. The females fight them. Sometimes the females end up dead in these battles. And so what I've just said about lions is, in the broad sense, is true for just about all wild animals. So, they're not pets. Life is very, very hard.
I agree with you, and it's not just lions. We've heard this from so many of of our presenters who are working in the wildlife field. We have one last question here. When we've been talking about ranchers, are most of them holdovers from the British era?
Yeah, most of the people in Laikipia, they're 4 generations ago, ancestors arrived in the early 1900s once the railroad was completed from the coast to Uganda. There was another big influx right after World War I when the British government started giving land to ex-soldiers. So quite a few of these ranches are owned by, again, people who've been there for generations, and they live pretty hand to mouth off of their livestock and tourism. A few of the ranches have been bought by very wealthy foreigners, people who want their little African playground. And of course, these people are also dedicated conservationists. They are there because of the wildlife, the landscape, and the local people. So yeah, it's a mix of ownership. In Laikipia, a few of these ranches are owned either by local Laikipia Maasai, guys who've done well one way or another. It's a whole mix. And of course, again, the communal areas are all the traditional people who have been there forever.
So is there a way that people can contribute to the education of young Kenyans so that they understand what you've been talking about this evening?
There are a lot of organizations which work with developing local skills and conservation and wildlife management abilities. African Wildlife Foundation is one that comes to mind immediately, that does a lot of work of that sort. In terms of supporting my good friend Stephen, who I have to say isn't a young man anymore. He's somewhere in his 40s. We've been working together for 25 years. These days, any research money or any money that I use in Africa comes through UC Santa Cruz as a vehicle for which people can donate and get their charitable tax deduction. I can give people my email or my phone number right now if somebody wants to get in touch, and we can arrange for UC Santa Cruz to handle the money for a very low overhead and move it on for Stephen's development and further education.
So if you'd like to just mention your email for that, I don't want you to give out your telephone number, but just your email, that if you don't mind, for people to contact you.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's just my name and initials, lgfrank@berkeley.edu.
Well, thank you. And thank you for a wonderful presentation this evening. It was a great story. Lions are often just pictured in movies as being the villains, or we have cartoon characters. I know your least favorite, the Lion King, but because of way hyenas are portrayed there. But yeah, they definitely hold the imagination of people. And when you think about it, no other creatures of the savannah sleep as deeply or as soundly as the lions. But after all, lions are the main reason for not sleeping soundly.
Precisely. Except for people, lions have no enemies. You can sleep at night if you're a lion or an elephant. You can't if you're a gazelle.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Lawrence, for giving this wonderful presentation. We look forward to seeing you next month, where in February, we're going to have a wonderful artist whose medium is silk. So thank you again for joining us this evening. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we look forward to seeing you in February. Good night. Sleep well.
Thank you very much, all. It's been a pleasure.